Okay, this is lecture for Chapter 2. Now, Chapter 2 is kind of about the nature versus nurture debate that you hear of a lot in kind of pop psychology. And in a way, a lot of us have thought that this debate was put to bed a long time ago. But as you read it, it kind of hasn't. The first thing that I want to cover is the ignore it section, the don't bother with it. Pretty much page 37 to 44. This goes over cell mitosis and meiosis and genetic splitting. This is largely irrelevant for psychology. Even the people that really believe in the biological perspective, we're not neurologists. And if you are, you're going to take very complicated neurology courses that are going to be going to completely override this one. One thing I do want to mention with the ignore it section, though, is consider anything in the ignore it sections something to read. Don't bother study it, but read it. These are, first of all, they're interesting and it is a well done book. But second of all, these are still questions that are available to be asked in extra credits. I just would never ask them for a grade if I say, to ignore it. The thing that I do want to cover, though, is the big new part here is the nature versus nurture debate. Now, we have a lot of aspects of nature or nurture in different parts of psychology. And psychology, the history of psychology is filled with people that take things to extremes. They go way, way too far with their attitudes. Watson, founder of behaviorism psychology, he felt that the nature versus nurture debate was completely irrelevant because the answer was obviously nurture. He was the one that said something akin to, give me any 20 children of any race, ethnicity, and I will turn them into a doctor, a lawyer, a bum, a thief, or an Indian chief. And he honestly really believed this. He thought that it was just our environment that was shaping us. We were blank slates when we were born, and we were basically all the same. Now, nowadays we think that extreme is absolutely ridiculous, that anybody would take the nature-nurture debate to that much of an extreme, when clearly both nature and nurture are very important parts of who we are and how we become who we are. On the other hand, what we miss is that mainstream psychiatry, and keep in mind, psychiatry is different from psychology in the fact that psychiatry medicates people. Mainstream psychiatry has just the exact same extreme perspective. If you know anybody who's on an antidepressant, that is just as extreme as Watson's view of a blank slate. By the way, as far as development goes, Watson had a similar extreme point of view with how to raise children. He felt that we raise children to try to be little adults, and the entire goal was to make them an adult. So if their environment was going to be shaping them and who you wanted them to be ultimately, why would you ever treat them like a child? So don't hug your child. Would you hug an adult? Of course not. You would shake his hand. So you would, shake your little toddler's hand and say, you did a good job today. How are you, how's the wife and kids? Whatever you would say to your adult friends. So again, just as extreme, and in his case, it didn't really work out. He had two children. One of them killed himself when he was in his early teens, and the other one became a famous psychologist from the humanitarian perspective, the very opposite of what his father claimed was true. So you have these very much extreme points of view, but if you take the psychiatric perspective, it's just as extreme as that behaviorist perspective. If you are depressed and taking a medication for it, the person giving you that medication is taking the perspective that you are depressed because your body is producing chemicals it's perhaps not producing enough dopamine, so or too much serotonin. So we will do serotonin inhibitors, we will do dopamine reactions, and we will get your chemicals, your biologics up to where other people find this happy. And obviously they're completely ignoring the fact that by all means, some people are depressed because they are, for lack of a better description, physically broken, but some people are depressed because they have crappy lives. Um, because perhaps they simply haven't been taught to think about things in the right way. Maybe they dwell on their problems too much. Personally, just anecdotally, I know a few people who are sad a lot, and they don't let things go. How are you going to be happy if you just don't let things go? This isn't a biological problem. This is a cognitive problem. They simply have not been taught to be happy. So try not to take the nature versus nurture thing as something that's been completely put to bed, because in a large way it hasn't. Um, that said, Harlow's monkeys, we were talking about that in discussion this week, are a great example of nature versus nurture. This was one of the first experiments where they really discovered nature versus nurture because, as I mentioned in the discussion post, Harlow had these monkeys that were raised on cloth mothers or raised on wire mothers, and they preferred one mother over the other. But then, after the experiment was over, they were already raised, and they didn't know what else to do with them. They didn't have anything else to do with these monkeys, so they did the same thing they did with all the other monkeys. They just kind of threw them in their cage. They had a pen for all the monkeys that weren't undergoing experiments at the time, and they said, okay, here you go, hang out with this until we have another project for you, and they just kind of dismissed it. But the people keeping the monkeys, the monkey keepers, I guess, noticed that these monkeys could not deal with things. They couldn't deal with anything social. They couldn't deal. They would literally sit in a corner, curled up, and just bite themselves over and over again until they were pretty much useless. If you do a YouTube video search of like Harlow's crazy monkeys, and you will see just really sad, depressing actions of these things. And so they went back and they took those monkeys and they really explored what they could do socially, what they couldn't do socially, and they found that it was all part of the nature versus nurture debate, because it is the monkey's nature to be social. But if they are, that is the biologic component. We are designed to be social creatures. But if we are not taught to be social creatures as well, that genetic component will never be expressed. As a matter of fact, we even have sensitive periods in our development where if these things are not taught within a specific time, they will never be expressed. So for a human, for example, the first year is the kind of affection year. And this is what Erikson's theory is all about. If you remember that from chapter 1, that there are these very specific times that we learn things. And it's very much been proven scientifically and experimentally as well. So you take, when they started studying chimpanzees, they found that for the first 6 months, the baby had almost constant physical contact, 98% of the time in physical contact with the mother. And relating to Harlow's monkeys, this was when they were learning affection, when they were learning how to be affectionate, how to learn to like people, how to learn to kind of deal with their own emotions. If they did not, you could not take a 6-month-old monkey who only had the wire mother and then give him a cloth mother. He would never learn affection. He would never learn to relate to anybody else. People relate this to humans by saying that, you hug your child too much, you didn't hug them enough. There is actually some truth in this. Babies need physical contact. They need that creature comfort in order to learn to be comforted at all. You cannot teach them later on. They just won't learn. Oddly enough, you take the next few months between, say, 6 months and a year, I think. And this is when they learn social interaction. So this is when they stop hanging out with the mother. Their time in physical contact with the mother goes to zero really fast within like a month, because the mother physically beats them every time the child tries to touch them. And while this seems cruel, it's because the child is entering a different developmental age. It's entering an age where what it is genetically predisposed to learn is social contact. So now it goes over and hangs out with the other monkeys, and the other monkeys teach it things. When Harlow excluded their monkeys from this, he'd give them a normal mother for the first 6 months, where they got to learn affection and everything like that. And then once the mother tried to reject him, and it was clear that they were on the social contact, he then isolated the monkey. So for the next 6 months it was isolated, and they never learned social interactions. It was kind of interesting because once you threw them back in the big monkey pen, they really wanted to be social, but they could never learn how. They wanted to mate, but which the ones starved for affection in the beginning never even had a desire to mate. They were basically sterile and infertile the whole time. But the ones socially isolated would want to mate, but they couldn't. They would like mount the next monkey sideways. They could see other monkeys doing it, but the time had long since passed where they would learn this sort of behavior. So they would like try to mount the ear or the shoulder, or they just had no clue what they were doing. Obviously, you couldn't tell this with a female monkey because female monkeys don't try to mate; they just kind of sit still and let the male monkeys do whatever they want. So the mounting behavior was just strange. So we have this very scientific evidence for both nature and nurture. Not only is it both, but they have to work together, or else just one or the other are useless and cannot actually be expressed in behavior or cognition. The last thing that I want to go over is the identical twin studies. These are fascinating. Everybody loves identical twin studies. In the book, it mentions two twins that were separated at birth, and then at about the age of 20, they found each other. They'd been living in the same city the whole time. And they had so much in common. They both liked the same sort of music. They both liked to dance. They were both B students. And this is totally meaningless in all ways. Gee, two 20-year-old girls who like to dance. What are the odds? I bet they even like the same music. It's almost like they were from the same generation. They lived in the same town. They had the same taste in clothes. Of course, they lived in the same town. They both lived in Mexico City. They were both 20 years old. Most 20-year-olds in the same town look about the same. They have about the same taste in clothes. This is called the Texas sharpshooter fallacy. And this is something, it's kind of a fault that we have in our brains where we look for patterns that don't really exist. You can look for similarities between Kennedy and Lincoln. And they have these, it's creepy if you think about it type of similarities where Kennedy had a secretary named Lincoln and Lincoln had a secretary named Kennedy, and the secretaries both had 7 letters in their last name, and this is totally meaningless. If you take any two people, they will have hundreds of similarities because there are millions of aspects of our lives. I could take any one of you, and I'm a weird person. I mean, I am not normal by any stretch of the imagination. And I take any one of you out there, and we have at least 100 things in common. We could say we were separated from birth because there's one of you out there that likes ties. This is my cupcake tie today. Perhaps one other person out there that dyes their hair blonde. Oh my God, we must be separated at birth. And the reason they call it the Texas sharpshooter fallacy is because the idea is you're just looking at random data points. So you take the broadside of a barn, and you're just shooting at the broadside of a barn, and you shoot, over, and you shoot like 100 shots at a barn, and it's completely random. You're a horrible shot. You can look at those 100 shots and see, maybe 10 of them that are pretty close. So this is what the Texas sharpshooter does. He writes a circle around those 10 shots and said, that's where I was aiming the whole time. Aren't I impressive? And the answer is no, because there's a million other times that he just missed and he did horribly. But we can look for patterns that don't really exist. Famous examples of this are, maybe some of you have heard of cancer clusters, where they found there are certain parts of the country where cancer is really, really common. There's 1 billion people in this country. There are going to be places where cancer is really, really common. There may even be patterns on where those places are, but it's not significant in any way whatsoever. You really need a lot more control over the environment in order to find those sorts of causal relationships. So be careful of that sort of stuff. That said, that's pretty much it. I'll have another one for chapter 3 tomorrow.